She had plenty of time to speak with the shrine maiden, but she wasn't really allowed to ask the questions she truly wanted. The main problem was that everything Maomao had said was just a guess, with no real evidence to support it. If it was true that the shrine maiden had come all this way just to make Aileen take a fall, then what weakness was Aileen so intent on leveraging? Wasn't this entire endeavor too risky? Maomao mused, I wonder what she has on the shrine maiden. She continued, I was so sure they were good friends. Despite the consort's attempts to use that weakness, she never seemed to hold a grudge against the shrine maiden. She appeared to genuinely respect her. Lahan rested his elbows on the table and drank some water. Maomao remembered and said, you should take it with food or it will upset your stomach. Lahan retrieved a snack from the shelf with some annoyance. It was a bun filled with potato paste. When Maomao asked if there weren't any meat buns, she was told rather curtly that there were not. Boo! If they were such good friends, Maomao said, I don't think we would be in this situation now. I am still convinced that Consort Aileen has deep respect for the shrine maiden. If the charges were not true, why would she offer the testimony that she did? True enough, Maomao admitted. I told her that I am more than open to hearing her defense if she has anything to say, but she goes and incriminates herself instead. Was he truly convinced by the charges against her? She is quite the actor. She had spoken badly of the shrine maiden and also confessed to the crime, essentially taking the guilt upon herself. Exactly how much did you hear about the relationship between Aileen and the shrine maiden? Maomao asked. Just what I told you. Mistress Aileen was a potential future shrine maiden. She spent almost 5 years as an apprentice with the current one. Typically, apprentices live in the shrine maiden's palace for their entire time as apprentices. They lose the right to be shrine maiden when their monthly time arrives. Typically, a marriage is arranged for young women once they leave the maiden's palace. However, Consort Aileen strongly opposed that arrangement. Instead, she and her cousin sought refuge with their grandfather. He was a practical man and recognized the value of the education they had received from the shrine maiden. That is how they became emissaries. Maomao had wondered how a couple of women had come to travel to a foreign country in such a capacity all by themselves, but it sounded like it hadn't been an easy path. If Aileen had learned of the shrine maiden's baby, or at least guessed at its existence, during her time as an apprentice, wouldn't you normally have revealed what you knew sooner? Maomao said. What do you mean? She asked. I mean about the infant. Her suspicion concerned the shrine maiden having borne a child. Perhaps she had not been seeking the shrine maiden's weakness, but simply been curious. If she had known about this child since she was an apprentice, why reveal it now? That was a fair point. Perhaps Lahan's fondness for a pretty face had created a blind spot for him. He straightened his glasses, then crossed his arms and closed his eyes. He said, how about this then? What if investigating whether the shrine maiden had a child was only a pretext? So you think so too? Lahan had some less than ideal qualities, but he was intelligent. He was very quick to figure things out when he put his mind to it. He said, suppose that was a bluff, a cover for something even bigger. Suppose this bigger thing is the reason we are in this situation now. I admit it would connect a lot of dots. The question then became what something even bigger was. Maomao and Lahan both made thoughtful noises. If my old man were here, Maomao began, I grant my honoured uncle appears to know something, but there is every chance he would refuse to tell us if he did. Liu Men had looked all along like something about the situation bothered him. Had he understood something that Maomao still did not? Perhaps he had a good idea, but as long as it was just a guess, he probably would not say anything. Maomao felt her anger rising again. If my honoured uncle could have examined the shrine maiden himself, we might have discovered something. Gee, sorry for being so inexperienced, Maomao said sharply. But she agreed that something was strange. Surely it should be all right for a eunuch to touch the shrine maiden, even if he was or had once been a man. She was silent for a long moment. What's the matter? Lahan asked. She only mumbled eunuch. She pressed her hand to her forehead. She felt she had the scattered pieces of an answer. She tried to recall what she knew. She took out the notes from the folds of her robes. She had recorded details of her exams of the shrine maiden. She had also tucked NN's letter in beside it. What's that? Lahan asked. It's a list of foods the shrine maiden eats often. They all treat women's disorders, which means they increase female chi. This list details their applications. The list included ingredients the friendly medical official had said he was compelled to take on his visits to the rear palace. At first Maomao thought he was so shaken by the memory because they tasted terrible, but when she saw the effects she had to give a sympathetic smile. "I think you could use some of this stuff, Maomao," Lahan ribbed her as he looked down the list. "Yeah, sure." Pop quiz: what are the characteristics of a eunuch? You know, you could stand to be a little more respectful to your older brother. Anyway, a eunuch's male chi dwindles, his hair becomes thinner and his voice gets higher. Yes, and he becomes more likely to put on weight as he gets older, at which point he can seem to age very rapidly. You can see it in my own father, but there is another thing. Lahan looked at her, very curious to know what it might be. If a boy is castrated before he develops into a man, his voice never changes. Also, his body hair never grows in. Because he lacks the male chi that motivates growth, his arms and legs can become disproportionately long. I have never exactly taken a long, hard look at the Shrine Maiden. Are you implying something? She is somewhat tall for a woman, and her limbs are rather long. She has begun to acquire a slight paunch in the last few years, and as it happens, there is a sickness that affects eunuchs. This sickness causes symptoms quite similar to those of a woman whose chi is decreasing. The details all fit perfectly. Hold on. I know even you can tell the difference between a castrated man and a real woman. You got a good look at her chest at least. Wait, Lahan had evidently remembered what was written on the list of medicines. Yes, and it was present and accounted for. Maomao took out the notes again, feeling that same rush of anger. NN's letter listed the effects of different medicines, including Hasma. Hasma is excellent for good skin and general beauty. It boosts stamina and is high in nutritional value. However, overuse can cause the chest to become enlarged. This was one of the medicines NN was giving to Yao. This certainly explained how much she had developed. In fact, Maomao remembered NN bragging about exactly that. Perhaps this was what had made the old physician smile with such pain. Too much of it could cause even a man to develop a large chest, and that was no joke. The chest is obviously the first thing you look at when trying to tell the difference between a man and a woman. The position of the belly button should have tipped me off. The Shrine Maiden's paunch made it hard to judge. Maomao did wonder about it though. If Maomao, who was quite familiar with the naked bodies of both men and women, hadn't connected the dots, how much harder would it be for Yao and NN? Eunuchs were not allowed near the Shrine Maiden because they were even more physically like her than the average woman. The secret might have been revealed. This had been the plan from the beginning. I want you to investigate whether the Shrine Maiden has borne a child. When that request was made, Maomao hadn't imagined the Shrine Maiden was a castrated man. What a shock! She had been completely fooled. The strange look Maomao's father had given her when she first reported the Shrine Maiden's notable physical characteristics. Perhaps it was because the possibility had occurred to him even then. If he had been able to look at the Shrine Maiden himself, he would almost certainly have discovered the truth. Is this the secret the Shrine Maiden has been so desperate to hide? Lahan said. It would certainly be the kind of vulnerability an opportunist could readily exploit. But wait, if that is true, why travel to another country to try to silence a woman who has already become a consort at a foreign court? And why do it in such a convoluted way? The Shrine Maiden was not a woman. If that hypothesis was correct, what other apparent realities might it undermine? Was the Shrine Maiden trying to blame Eileen, or was Eileen trying to take the blame herself? If so, why? She gained nothing by it, but Li did. On that point, Maomao said, "Consider what would happen if the Shrine Maiden's killer had been one of our own people. It would be a matter of national face," said Lahan. It could even mean war. It makes me quite grateful that Mistress Eileen confessed to everything herself, so it is not a problem for us if she is the culprit. I wouldn't say no problem, but it is unlikely to start an international conflict. It will unquestionably put us on the back foot with Sheo, however. So Sheo would find itself in an advantageous position with regard to one of its biggest neighbours, and without a war. It made Maomao's head spin, but she knew she had to stay calm and think things through. She should start with the Shrine Maiden's gender. What would happen if Sheo found out their Shrine Maiden was a man? She asked. What would happen if we found out our emperor was a woman? Lahan replied. Maomao realized her question was ridiculous. It seemed like a contradiction in terms. Li had never in its history had an empress as its sole ruler. The former emperor's mother was sometimes called the Empress Regnant, but it was more of a nickname than a proper title. If she had tried to take the throne by pretending to be a man, she would have been punished. Trust in the government would also have been deeply shaken. Lahan said, "It is said that the government of Sheol has two pillars, the Shrine Maiden and the King. I am sure there are those who would be happy to see that reduced to one pillar. But in any case, the authority of the next Shrine Maiden would be at rock bottom if there even was a next Shrine Maiden. All the advances so diligently made during the era of the current Shrine Maiden would be undone. The current Shrine Maiden's long tenure had allowed women to express their opinions more freely in Sheol. If it was discovered the maiden was a man, it would undo everything that had been achieved. What must Eileen feel about that? Eileen, thanks to the education the Shrine Maiden gave her, was able to avoid a marriage she didn't want. She even became an emissary despite being a woman. Whoever the Shrine Maiden's enemies are, whether the king or his associates, they would have discovered her secret sooner or later. So instead she did something unprecedented. She took a trip, Maomao said. She wasn't sure, just trying the idea out. The whole point of the trip was to prevent her enemies from discovering the truth. She stopped. The Shrine Maiden had gone somewhere she wouldn't be discovered. It was somewhere they couldn't reach her. So she would leave behind no evidence and no doubts. Maomao pressed a hand to her forehead and gritted her teeth. This couldn't mean what she thought it did, could it? Yet the dawning realization was the one that made the most sense in light of everything the Shrine Maiden had done. Finally she gave voice to her awful suspicion. By committing suicide. Chapter 20 Mushroom Congee. The breeze was damp. It was so much cooler than the climate she came from. She couldn't seem to get used to the feeling on her skin. The sun was less intense here, even indoors she could tell. She could take slightly longer walks than normal, and that made her happy. She thought back over the adventures she'd had these past months. She had previously spent all her time in her residence, where she was worshipped. She was now accustomed to people venerating her, but it could become boring. She had been prepared to hand over her position to anyone who wanted it. However, her own existence prevented any chance of that happening. They called her Shrine Maiden, and had for so long that she no longer remembered her own name. If she gave up her position now, she wouldn't even know what to call herself. And now, it was all finally coming to an end. This quiet time had been the final delay. Her room was darkened by many curtains. A rustling sound came from the dimness. She wondered what it was for a moment, then she saw a girl peeking out at her. Her name was Jazgul. It meant flower of spring. The girl, born without a voice, had been brought to her about a year before. Perhaps it would have been uncouth to ask how she came to be with the Shrine Maiden. She was quite pretty in her own way. However, her long limbs showed she was not well nourished. She could not read or write, but she could hear and she understood what people said to her. The lack of accomplishments was actually perfect for the Shrine Maiden. The Shrine Maiden beckoned to Jazgul, and Jazgul came to her happily. There were no visitors today. The Shrine Maiden had been sick in bed for some days, unable to entertain Jazgul. Now she felt she had to make up for it. She smiled at Jazgul as the girl approached her. She slid off the bed and brought a few items to her from one side of the room. They included some pigment. The Shrine Maiden dipped her finger in the red stuff and daubed it on Jazgul's forehead. She fringed the tattoo on her face to emphasize it. Jazgul simply stood and let her work, clearly pleased. Perhaps it was her lack of learning, or the fact that she made no conversation, but she seemed even younger than she looked. Once she had painted Jazgul's face, the Shrine Maiden took out several sheets of sheepskin paper. She set up some dye and gave Jazgul the feather of a waterfowl. "What kind of dream did you dream today?" she asked. Jazgul began an unsteady illustration. She could not speak or write, so these crude pictures were her only means of communication. When she was drawing, she became quite absorbed in what she was doing. She could not stay in the Shrine Maiden's room. It was almost time to eat. "Go back to your room," the Shrine Maiden said. She collected the paper and dye and gave them to Jazgul. The paper was too large for the girl to hold, and she dropped some of it. She quickly tried to pick it up and looked at the Shrine Maiden. She silently begged to stay with her, but there were things even the shrine maiden could not change. She patted Jazgul's head, even more gently than usual. You cannot stay with me forever. I know you can draw pictures on your own. Jazgul nodded and the shrine maiden smiled. A few moments after the child left the room, the attendant with tanned skin entered. The shrine maiden called her oracle. The word meant something very similar to shrine maiden, and like the shrine maiden, the oracle had also forgotten her own name. Nearly 20 years had passed since she became the new oracle. The shrine maiden remembered something the last oracle told her. She said the word for shrine maiden sounded exactly like another word. That other word meant child of the gods. It was fitting that someone called an oracle should serve the child of the gods. After all, wasn't it the oracle's duty to hear the voices of the gods? Somewhere along the way, the child of the gods had become the shrine maiden. Was it because women were the ones chosen for the position? Or was it because only women remained? She did not know. She did feel it was right and proper that she should be shrine maiden. The previous oracle had discovered her when she was very young. She had lived in the shrine maiden's palace since before she could remember. She had been told she was special. She had white hair, white skin, and red eyes. People said the lack of color in her body allowed her to hear the gods' voices more clearly. Every movement she made was taken as prophecy, and the oracle read and interpreted it. Everyone knew the predictions of the pale shrine maiden would come true. She was the one person even the king dared not look in the eye. She was hardly even human, but sat amidst the shadows of her palace, enthroned like a god. A shrine maiden did not need to be learned. Her very being was supreme. Throughout the ages, the oracles had never given the shrine maidens much of an education, yet that is what the previous oracle had done for this shrine maiden. Perhaps she had just been a little different. She taught the shrine maiden to read and write, and she gave her letters. None of this changed the fact that the shrine maiden knew little of the wider world. She knew she could no longer occupy her office once she began menstruating. But she did not know what would happen to her after she had been dethroned. She could not imagine what fate might await her, so she turned 10, then 15. Menstruation arrived at a different moment for each person. She had heard of shrine maidens in the past to whom it never came. Therefore, she did not question her own lack of menstruation. She simply continued working as a shrine maiden. She noticed other things about her body that made her different. She did not develop as other women did. Her chest never grew, but her arms and legs kept getting longer. Even someone as sheltered as she was understood the differences between men and women. When she asked the oracle, she was told, "You are special." After that, she was given new and unfamiliar foods to eat. Her chest began to swell, but her blood still never came. The months and years passed, and she remained ignorant, not comprehending what was happening. Her fame as a shrine maiden increased, and so did the number of people who sought her auguries. She was told that during divination, she could do whatever she wished, but she must not speak. The oracle would say everything for her. The oracle who had told her all of this and done all of this for her finally met her end when the shrine maiden was 20 years old. It was simply her time, but having never seen anyone die, the shrine maiden hadn't fully understood. The ailing old oracle had been replaced by her granddaughter. Before she passed, the old oracle told the shrine maiden why her menses had never begun, and why her body didn't behave like a woman's. The shrine maiden, she said, had been born in a small village. It was a rare place of lush greenery among the parched lands of Sheol. It was a well-known retreat for shrine maidens who had retired from their duties. Many of the villagers were descended from generations of shrine maidens. Some of those maidens were likely pale as well. The current shrine maiden was born there a man. It seemed ludicrous when the oracle revealed the truth. It was like a bad joke, but the oracle continued talking in her withered, crackly voice. She said the king at that time was a bad king. Sheol flourished as a crossroads of trade. However, the king had outrageous ideas about making war on other lands. His advisors tried to talk him out of them, but he was young and headstrong and would not listen. The shrine maiden was the other pillar of the kingdom, the one who could check the king's power. The shrine maiden at that time did not have enough force of will. She also seemed close to retirement given her age. If a new shrine maiden appeared, she might be able to stand against the king. This was especially true if she were a pale maiden, the most sacred of all. So the oracle used the shrine maiden to humble the foolish king. She made sure the shrine maiden was not a man. He was castrated at the same time as the male goat kids. Now a woman, the shrine maiden was presented to the king. She cried at the unaccustomed surroundings. This is not unusual for a squalling infant. However, the oracle used the moment to pronounce the king unfit. These revelations seemed to invalidate the shrine maiden's entire life. In an instant, her 20 years in the office felt like a lie. She had always believed she was special, but now she knew she was just a pawn. She was used to unseat the king. She wished she could upbraid the dying oracle and vent her fury and shame.